So today we have Ben Roy of Noves and Zach Hogg of Solana. So Ben and Noves, their kind of mission, and Ben, you can correct me and add flair and flavor when needed. But Noves is essentially trying to make blockchain data more human readable. So they have a tool that acts as a plugin on different web browsers, and I'm sure that they have other ways that you can leverage the tool as well. But it basically kind of takes the data on these different block explorers and provides it in a more human readable fashion. And so when I'm looking to better understand the underlying functionality of how something works, or want to better understand the flow of funds and how things work in that fashion, I often reach out to Ben and Christian over at Noves to get a better understanding of that stuff. And we also have Zach Hogg, who's the controller over at Solana. So I figured I'd reach out to him to see if he might be able to join us. And because I'm sure that he's encountered a lot of these things as well. So probably less of a technical kind of insight to it, although I'll let you kind of tell that about yourself. More of the accounting and tax focus, right? So just wanted to give those guys a quick intro. And I don't know if Ben or Zach, you want to jump in and just kind of fill in a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Sure, I'll jump in quick. Thank you. So yeah, what you said is true. I would go even a little bit more broad, which is that we're just focused on trying to make blockchain data more usable all around. A big piece of that is certainly, people interacting with it and being able to use it, but also making it more digestible for accounting and tax, making it more digestible in wallets, in explorers, just like anywhere that applications interact with data. It's generally pretty messy and difficult, and we just want to make that easier and better so that people can focus on building better apps and helping onboard new solutions and things like that.
Awesome. Zach?
Yeah, thanks, Taylor, and pleasure to be on here with everyone and Ben as well. Yeah, I mean, myself, I've been at Solana Foundation for about 2 years now, the controller, really just overseeing financial processes, operations, and accounting. But yeah, as part of that day-to-day job, get involved in a myriad of the different block explorers and on-chain type transactions, and of course, turning that all back into accounting in whatever fiat reporting currency of choice. So happy to be speaking on this topic as well with Ben.
Very cool. So just for those people who are just joining now, at the top of the chat, you'll find some PDF docs that might be helpful. The first one is kind of more in depth. It's much longer. It's like a deep dive into some of the stuff that I used ChatGPT's deep research function to help me with. And the second one is kind of more of a distilled version that has like kind of the high level points as well as some other things there. So some of the first, I know that there's a lot of confusion for folks around, because a lot of people who use Solana come from an EVM environment or got familiar with crypto through Ethereum and the Ethereum network. And so people are used to reading data and reconciling data by looking at things the way they would on Ethereum. And so, I wanted to first kind of talk about or ask you guys about the different structures of how things like staking work and how things like tokens work on chain, so that people can better understand maybe the inherent differences there that might exist that might make it a little bit more confusing for someone to look at that sort of stuff.
I'm happy to take this one to start with. Again, I can explain more from like more of a business high level lens, not the engineering sense, but I think I'll do my best, and maybe Ben can jump in as well. But the way I think about using Solana on chain, whether it's native staking or otherwise, every address that you have connected with a wallet, I associate that with the terminology of a withdrawal authority address. So like if you have if you set up a wallet on like a Solflare, Phantom, what have you, whatever you call like that address with the QR code or whatnot, that public key, that I always call the term withdrawal authority address. So this is like kind of like a master address, if you will. And then if you want to do staking on Solana natively, what actually happens is you will create a stake address within this withdrawal authority address, which it owns. And then you will move SOL to this stake address that your address owns, and then you'll do the delegating from there. And that's a part of like the delegated proof of stake network setup. So that's, I believe, a little different than probably other proof of stake networks. So that's one sort of convoluted piece of Solana, is that there are different types of addresses. So you can have this withdrawal authority address, which owns other addresses, which are stake addresses. And then there's other types of addresses as well, like validator addresses, and so on. But we'll keep it simple with that sort of relationship. And so in the simpler sense, just if you're just doing native staking, you move SOL to the stake address, you stake there, it's delegated. Then when you undelegate, you can withdraw it back to your withdrawal authority. So your withdrawal authority address basically, is the control over those funds in that stake address. So if you have the withdrawal authority address of a stake address, you basically own those funds because you have the ability to withdraw it. But there's also another complication, which is called a stake authority. So a stake authority can be given to stake addresses as well, and it can be your withdrawal authority address, or it can be another address. And then that stake authority basically has the privileges of deciding whether or not to stake with a validator, unstake with a validator, but it does not have the ability to move funds outside of the stake address itself. And then another authority address you can have on a stake address is not as seen as often, but you might hear it every so often, which is a lockup authority address. So if this third sort of authority address over stake addresses is actually where locked SOL comes from programmatically on chain. So if you were to use if you're really technical and use command line to send some SOL around, you can send it locked, which is when you create a stake address and send it across to this other withdrawal authority address, which is another piece I'll get into in a moment. But by doing that and setting up a lockup authority address, you basically have a timer on this address when the funds can be withdrawn out of the stake address to a withdrawal authority address that owns it. So that's a whole other type of authority, but that lockup authority only designates the time at which the funds can be withdrawn. They can always be staked at that time because they're in a stake address, and you do have a stake authority over them. You can delegate them to a validator. But yeah, as I just explained with the whole concept of sending locked SOL, you can send and move around stake addresses as well, which is, I think, the kind of the final frontier for subledger tools to kind of get a handle over. But in addition to this concept of delegating, withdrawing, once you do move funds into a stake address, you can move the stake address to another withdrawal authority altogether. So that can be another way that you send SOL on the Solana network, is I can give my stake address to another withdrawal authority address. And that in itself is like either, maybe it's internal because I'm moving it within my own withdrawal authority addresses, or I might be moving it to someone else's withdrawal authority instead of just sending it, just as a basic transfer between withdrawal authority addresses. I think that's sort of the quick high level. So Ben, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to ask a question about that. I've never looked at this, but I'm assuming that historical state of like the withdrawal authority on a stake account is not available anywhere on the chain, right?
Right. So this is kind of like the immediate complication that comes up if you're say like, oh, I'm going to start doing some of my accounting on Solana, and I've done some, staking transactions in the past and used stake addresses in the past. Yeah, like generally speaking, like if you're trying to look at, you're not going to really get a historical, like I forgot the term of the RPC, but there's like some sort of historical state RPC that you might try to look at. It doesn't really give you that view. Generally, most people just take a stab at this prospectively, where they'll there's a curl command where you can get the program token accounts or the stake addresses at a point in time, and then you'll continue to start doing that. But the best way to do this, to get like a historical sense of stake accounts and what you've owned over time, is actually starting from square one of an address that you own and going through all of the transaction hashes, because the act of creating stake addresses, delegating, withdrawing, moving stake addresses, closing stake addresses, even though those stake accounts might lose relationship in the block explorer on chain after they've moved to different addresses or after they've been closed, that transaction activity is still within the withdrawal authority address. So if you were to have a very strong subledger tool or block explorer tool that can go through all of those transactions, read those instructions, they would be able to give you a history of all these stake accounts over time, and where and when you own them and what happened when you did own them. But yeah, that's basically going through each transaction hash and understanding all of the program instructions, from like the first transaction that you have at a certain address.
That's how we do discovery for token accounts as well, because if you have a token account that's been closed, there's no way to query to find that out, right? That you had that at some point in time. So we do a crawl through your transaction history and accumulate every account that mattered ever in your transaction history, and then pull the full history of those accounts. But in the case of a token account, if someone changed stake account, if someone changed the withdrawal authority from on a stake account that they owned to my wallet, and I hadn't claimed any rewards or done anything yet, I wouldn't be able to find that in my history anywhere, right? Because it wouldn't show up until the first time that
So that's a good question. So you're right. Like if you were to just look at like your wallet again, like your main withdrawal authority address without thinking about it otherwise, that is one thing we see is every so often is when stake addresses get sent or when locked SOL gets sent, most people don't realize it because they're not looking at their stake addresses. That's right. Like that transaction hash for changing the withdrawal authority is signed by the authority that moved the funds. So yeah, you might not be initially realize that you have this new stake address unless you actually looked at your stake addresses that you have.
This may be I think I need to know the answer to this question, but is there any way to tell the difference between a like the main account that we were just talking about versus like these stake accounts and these other accounts by just looking at the alphanumeric code?
That is a good question.
from the address, you mean?
Yeah, from the address. Sorry.
I don't think so.
That would be
I personally
brain.
don't know.
That
Yeah,
would be
I
a
personally
big
don't
deal.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing, yeah, so like it's more obvious like when you look at it in like Soul Scan, I think isn't maybe the best or the newest block explorer for Solana, but it's one I think that kind of breaks things down fairly readably. But like if you're to look at stake accounts for like a withdrawal authority address on there, it can kind of show you what's the withdrawal authority address, what are the stake addresses, what are the stake accounts, and it does a pretty good job of parsing those out. But like let's say if I was to like look at an old address that I had in SoulScan and it's a stake address, it's not really going to look like anything. Because even SoulScan can't even associate that it used to be a stake address that has some transactions, but it doesn't have any staking reward information anymore. So you kind of do lose that like contextual information once it does get closed. If you're just looking at the stake address itself. So that's one thing I've noticed in the past.
So basically, if I'm understanding correctly, the best way to ensure that you have all of your stake addresses and all your token addresses or whatever is to go back from transaction one and to look at everything. So like, I'm guessing that, in the future, as we get AI systems and deep machine learning systems that can look at the entire blockchain, because, we're not far from this, I don't think, we can kind of see on chain based on what it knows, based on all the public information that's out there, you know, if tools can eventually leverage that information, I'm guessing. So it seems like it's an issue now, but it might not be an issue in 3 years or 2 years or, you know, 1 year, you know?
The thing that's,
That's
the thing that's challenging about that is we have, at the same time that we're increasing our capacity to process that data, people are also pushing the limits of the amount of data that's coming through, right? I mean, this gets like slightly out of the topic of this call, but you look at Eclipse, which is also an SVM chain, and they're running, you know, higher TPS, and you've got like Mega ETH coming with their whatever 100K a second or something like that. And so the ability to index the entire thing in its entire historical state and keep that around is a moving target as fast as we're building indexing systems that can keep up with it. So it's kind of like a, you know, it's like a leapfrogging sort of a problem that's happening.
Good point. Yeah, I think you know, maybe so aside from the staking accounts and aside from the token accounts, there's also, from what I understand, like a vote account. So that's another separate address. And the reasoning, my understanding, the reasoning for having all these different addresses is so that you don't have to have as much complication within like smart contracts. Is that part of the reasoning behind having these new wallet addresses for is that, or am I off base on that?
I believe that's related to like the validator operations
Mhm.
It's
and
like
pushing blocks. Maybe Ben
compared
knows
to the
better
EVM,
here.
it's just like a different, it's just a different approach. Like the entire underlying system is account based where um uh, something like EVM, you know, the way that tokens work aren't actually like in your wallet. It's really just a smart contract that has a like sort of an index of everybody that has the token. And then we have a UI experience that makes it seem like those things are in your account. Whereas Solana is, you know, works the way that we think about it, which is that there are actual accounts that have storage allocated to them that hold the information that is relevant to those accounts. And so that architecture leads to needing to design it in a different way in order to store that effectively at the scale that it's storing it at. And so that's why you end up with that account model instead of the, you know, kind of the other direction around.
So moving kind of down the track of staking and unstaking and things like that, can you guys talk a little bit about the act of, you know, obviously when you create a stake, you generate a new wallet address, basically, that holds this stake on behalf of your executing wallet, or the withdrawal authority wallet. But then when you deactivate or kind of remove your stake, uh,
So there's two
how does
things
that
that can
functionality
happen.
work? And what happens to
Yeah.
that
So
wallet address, you know?
yeah. So there's a couple of things that can happen. So in addition to like, well, there's a few things that can happen. One is you can withdraw your stake, and when you do that, or sorry, once you stop the first you have to stop the delegation to withdraw it. So you stop the delegation, and at the end of the epoch, you know, 2 or 3 days later, then you can withdraw the funds through withdrawal authority address. When you do that, you can decide to close the address. So what happens is, and like Ben mentioned, everything's kind of you know, there's like rent for your stake address or your token program accounts. So when you close the address, that's also why like you lose all this information kind of currently on chain when you look at it, because you close out the storage for it, so you're no longer showing it within your own withdrawal authority. So what happens is you withdraw it, you'll close it, you'll get the rent back as well, which is like 0.002238 or something like that, or at least that's what it used to be. I think it might have changed recently, but you'll get that small amount of SOL back as rent, and that address will no longer be associated with your withdrawal authority. What you could also do is you could stop the delegation and withdraw part of it, or you can withdraw the whole thing and keep the stake address open. So you're still holding that very small amount of SOL as rent, and the stake address is still actively owned by your address, by your withdrawal authority.
So if you
What you could
added to that stake, would it, if you wanted to add to a stake, would you have to delegate, would you have to decide whether it goes to that existing stake address, or would it automatically create a new stake address until you deactivate and remove all the previous SOL?
Yes, yeah. So generally the easiest way to add more stake is to just create a new delegation.
Okay.
So that creates, so yeah, so you could have multiple stake addresses for one withdrawal authority address. Generally, that's, I think, in practice, the easiest way to add more, as opposed to trying to stop a delegation or try to delegate more to an active stake address. Is to just create a new stake address and a new delegation. What you can also do when withdrawing is you can technically withdraw from your stake address to someone else's withdrawal authority address. And then a couple other more complicated, like command line type functions is you can split the stake address into two stake addresses, which you can do in like even just a Solflare software wallet today. So like that can be really useful if, let's say, you're using Solflare, you're delegating with Solflare itself and their validator, and they'll give you the option of instant withdrawal before the epoch closes. And let's say you don't want to pay 1% on the whole delegation, you only want to pay like the 1% on the amount they actually want to withdraw. So you could split the stake and have two stake addresses. You have your total, or the sum of the whole, but then you only have a small amount that you actually wanted to instantly withdraw, and then you can pay the instant withdrawal on just that smaller 1% on just that smaller amount, as opposed to 1% on the whole thing. And save some fees there. So sometimes splitting staking, even within a software wallet, can be advantageous. So that is one thing you can do there. And then again, generally on more command line type functionality, you can do the opposite of that, where you merge two stake accounts together, and one of the stake accounts will remain, other one will be effectively closed as well.
So the best kind of like, what are the best ways to track active versus inactive stakes? So apparently there's there's two different methods. There's the Explorer method, which can look at stake accounts, which would look at, I'm guessing, only active stakes. But if you need to look at inactive ones, it looks like there's a RBC or API method that allows for some of that.
Yeah, so when you say inactive stake, do you mean just like no longer delegated?
No
Or do you
longer
mean like the
delegated,
stake
but
account's
I'm
like
guessing like
closed?
closed out.
Okay.
It had held a stake previously, but you withdrawed it all and you basically closed it, so it's no longer active.
Okay. So yeah, two different things. So yeah, if it's no longer active and it's kind of like an inactive status, that's more like you've withdrawn it, or it's no longer delegated, but it's not closed yet. So those type of addresses, stake addresses, you can still see in like a block Blocksport, like SolScan will still show it. One thing I think is interesting with SolScan is when you go to a withdrawal authority address that you look up, it'll give you stake addresses, that list. It also like it'll say like, oh, you have a stake of 1,000 SOL. That number that they show you is just what's actively staked. It's not actually what's in the total of all your stake address. So you could have another 1,000 SOL that's not delegated, but you still own. It's in with your stake addresses, but SolScan is not going to expose that number right away. But it's still, I always think of SOL as in what's in your balances. Like, just tell me what's in total. I don't care about what's actually staked in terms of like just a number that I own. I want to know the amount that's within all these addresses, because as you get into into the weeds, you get both staking rewards that are dropped into your stake address. These are not atomic transaction hashes. They're just reward slots, which are sometimes very hard for subledgers to pick up or piece together once they get their head around the stake account relationship. Is then, how do you actually expose these rewards in the data? And then there's also MEV. So that MEV is a bit newer to Solana, but it's been around for a little bit of time now, about a year, that everyone's been running the Jito validator client, basically. So MEV is also another thing that is added to your stake address, but these are actually received through the Jito tip um, uh, signing authority. So those are immediately exposed, and you can see those in a block explorer as well as transactions of receiving SOL to these stake addresses. So those are two different ways that your stake address can accumulate value over time, but you're not going to be delegating those amounts. So sometimes that's why it's useful to know the difference between what's delegated to the validator versus what is actually held within the stake address. In order to see stake accounts that are closed out, you're not going to get that immediate exposure if you're looking at a block explorer or even an RPC and make that function call. You have to again look at your transaction hashes to search for what you closed. Then you'll find these older addresses. So even a block explorer, you can do that. It's just a matter of knowing where to go. Don't look at stake addresses or accounts. You need to look at transaction hashes and look for the times that you ran like the close command.
Okay, interesting. And just a reminder, anyone who is on this call can either raise their hand or just start speaking up to ask any clarifying questions or anything like that. Another kind of question I had for both of you guys, Ben or Zach, I'm sure that you guys have some tools that you might recommend for kind of looking at blockchain data related to Sol. You know, obviously we know Solscan, or we have like Arkham or BlockSec. You guys have any other kind of recommendations for top tier kind of data providers for Solana?
Hey Ben, would you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I mean, I don't really have other tools to recommend because we mostly rely on our own data. Um, one of the things that happens with people who build UIs is they try to interpret and display the data in a way that they think is better or more meaningful or more useful. And a lot of time you end up sort of obfuscating things or rounding errors or like weird stuff that just like doesn't show up the way that you want it. One of the things I do appreciate about Solscan is there are a lot of buttons that will let you reveal underlying more raw data, which is great because a lot of times what I'm seeing isn't what I want to see, and you can click to get the raw version and kind of see what came back. But even then, there's details that they're hiding, right? So for us, when I'm working through something, I use Solscan pretty regularly to get the quick view and to be able to investigate stuff, but I also will pull the raw data in a separate window, and I'm just looking at like what we're actually getting off of the chain in order to understand what's happening, because at the end of the day, that's the cleanest thing that we can get. And for that stuff, we mostly trust the data that we're getting and use that.
Cool. So when do you guys have an active tool for Solana that people can leverage to better interpret this data? Is it part of the extension that you guys use for other chains?
We do, yeah, we do have our data in the extension. It's a little thinner for Solana, just because we haven't had as much maybe demand, I guess, from people that are using that side of the tool. Solana is the #1 chain that people come to us for actual data feeds for, because it's the one that they have the most trouble getting clean data. So as far as like integration partners or accounting and tax platforms and stuff like that, Solana is usually their intro to us. They find us when they're trying to get Solana data, and then we work on other chains with them as well. And then we do have like a CSV export tool that's a little more like UI driven, where you can put in an address and get the history. It's a little bit tough with Solana, honestly, because of all the stuff we've been talking about, where you get that first CSV, but you've also got to get all the other tools. We're pretty close right now on a service that you put in your primary at your withdrawal authority address, your root address, and it will aggregate, dedupe every token account, staking account, all of the things, and give you a single feed that just says, here's every single transaction that matters for you. I think from like a CSV or like a little bit less technical integration perspective, that will be much more useful when we plug that in, because that's really what I think most people actually want. They don't want to deal with all these other details. They just want to be able to plug in their address and get everything.
Cool.
I do like that. It's very utilitarian. Just give me what I need. I don't need the fancy UIs and make rules and classifications. Yeah, I know. As I know personally, yeah, the variety of subledgers and tax tools we've tested out and given feedback on. Generally, it's like, well, yeah, the platform is great, but I just want the clean data. And once we have the data, we're accountants. We'll be able to do the accounting too. But no, it's great. We myself, like personally, I've like reviewed quite a few of the subledgers out there and a handful of like retail tax tools. I think there's always areas for improvement or opportunity with them, and they've definitely been getting better. Um, I'm not sure if you guys are looking for me to name
Do you
different
have
systems
any
or anything like
recommendations,
that.
or which ones do you think do it the best so far?
Yeah, so I think out of the handful that I've seen lately, personally that I've seen, I think ones that are better in terms of understanding these sort of like relationships on Solana and giving you your transaction history. Some of the ones that are good are, I would say, Crypto Worth, Integral's been a good one. Trez has actually had a good platform. They generally find like folks that build validator first or for validators will get the native staking stuff better because they solve for the people making all the money doing the transaction validating and starting the rewards, the native staking reward cycle. So they've kind of figured out how these things sort of work, and then they just flip it over to the end delegator. So the two that have kind of focus on validators first were Trez and Node 40. So they both do a pretty good job because they kind of focus on serving validators first for their solution. Whereas like CryptoWorth or Integral are more so like operator focused. But those are a few that we've reviewed recently that are, I think, doing a better job than some other ones in that sort of area. And then there's a couple tax tools I've seen in the past. Like I think it's always harder. Like once you get this concept for like institutional tools, that's easier than getting it for like a retail user. So I think there's been a couple other ones that have kind of been trying to figure this out and get better at it. But I think one that I've seen recently is called Awaken.tax. They seem to be doing a pretty good job at it. I know people in the past like to use stake.tax, just like very much enter in your address, give me some data, a CSV output. I haven't used it in a while, but that was one that at least could figure out all this how the stake address relationship worked.
That was
But those were a couple.
Awaken.tax.
Yeah, Awaken.tax is a newer one that does have that concept of knowing the stake addresses and even can give you the optionality. Let's say you want to have a more aggressive tax approach and say like, no, it's only income when I withdraw the stake, or versus like, oh, it's income when I earn it into the stake address. They'll give you that sort of optionality as well.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Course.
Yeah. I mean, I know that there's a lot of tools out there, and they, sometimes you have to kind of play, mix and match to figure out the best answer. Gilbert was asking what the other option was after Crypto Worth. I think you said Integral and who else?
Trace.
Trace.
Yeah, sorry, just typing that out for y'all now. But yeah, it was Crypto Worth, Integral, more on the operator side, but then Trez and Node 40 kind of built out their solutions, validator first in mind. So they do a very good job on this sort of like this whole native staking part of the Solana.
Especially at the
As well as
enterprise.
these other these other ones, but all four of them understand the stake account and stake address and withdrawal authority address relationships.
Very cool. So I know that we had a couple more questions from folks. Let me just see. So we were talking a lot about staking and things like that, but I wanted to touch base a little bit more on like vesting and locks because I'm very familiar with how that stuff works on the Ethereum side, but less familiar on the Solana side, just because of my prior experience with that. I worked for a company that like hosted audited smart contracts that were for token locks, liquidity locks, things like that. That was like one of my largest gigs in the space. Yeah, just curious if you guys could shine a little light on that, because I know one of our users, I think it was Jennifer, was asking about kind of those types of functionality.
Yeah, Ben, I don't know if you have much insight on this one. Again, my more so expertise, or what I see regularly day to day, is more in the locked SOL, so the programmatically locked SOL, where you receive a stake address that has this third authority on it called the lockup authority, and by having that lockup authority address associated with the stake address, which is from the sender has this authority. They set a date, and then at that date, the funds will effectively unlock, and you can withdraw the SOL. But those are like programmatically, like on chain created. So that's a little different than what you're talking about in terms of vesting. But in terms of like how lock SOL is done, that is effectively what lock SOL is. It's just a stake address that you own, that someone else has this lockup authority date posted on it, and then you can delegate the SOL, you can stake it, you can earn rewards while it's in a stake address, you can earn MEV, but you just can't withdraw it until that lockup has expired on the address. But yeah, I personally don't deal too much with vesting and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I haven't had anything with that come up. I don't know that there's any like standard kind of official vesting anything in the Solana ecosystem.
Looks like there needs to be,
Yeah.
things like like what would the president of Argentina with his meme coin, things like that. Like, I mean, that was one of the reasons. So I worked at Trust Swap, which we bought out Team.finance, which does the whole goal was to prevent what happened in 2017, which coins would ICO, and then the team would either drain liquidity or they would dump their tokens on the new project holders, which sounds like we've had a lot of the casino play out on Solana over the last year, 2 years, right? And it seems like more functionality would be better from that standpoint, where you have transparency from teams locking up liquidity so that they're not going to rug it out from under people, or they're not going to 80% of the tokens are held by the team maybe, but those are going to be locked up for 5 years. So there's like or 2 years or whatever. Those are going to have a little bit more I don't know, like
That's yeah. So it's more on like the token launch, post TGE,
yeah, exactly.
tokenomics type stuff, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's not necessarily an on-chain thing. I know like things like pump.fun, there's a certain amount of, they're supposed to be anti-rug, but of course, maybe you've seen or haven't seen otherwise, but yeah, there's supposed to be the way that pump.fun works, where you kind of you're burning some part of the supply, so that folks aren't doing that. I personally don't use pump.fun or any of the dot funds to mess around with that sort of stuff. So I haven't seen it in practice, but I know that there's something supposed to be behind that, but I guess it works or it doesn't work. But there are a few providers that do help with like tokenomics and post TGE. Like Forged is one of those. They're more so on like let's say more consulting side. But there's some other providers like a Liquify, Magna, even Pulley now as well, that are more so service or Toku. That those are like providers out there that help you do this. And I know Liquify, even just from my own recollection of like demoing their product, where that instance of like, oh, the team kind of disappears. Do I ever get the tokens? So some of these providers are built in a way that it's like an entirely Web3 sort of product, So like people log in by connecting a wallet, and then you just receive it as you're supposed to, regardless of what the the team's involvement is. So like the team comes in with Magna or Toku or Liquify or whatever, it says here's the schedule, and then the schedule just sort of happens.
So
But yeah, that's not like a natively on chain sort of thing, unless these projects themselves, whether it's Magna, Toku, or Liquify, have their own like smart contract running in the background.
I did see a couple of examples of programs that do, enforced lockups and token distribution and stuff like that. So certainly it exists. I think the problem with like Melee and these other coins is like they don't want that. Like nobody is looking to prevent themselves from rugging. So as an optional tool, they're certainly not gonna
Right,
go for it.
right.
But I think,
Investors need to demand it, basically.
yeah. Zach, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think like the official Sol lockups, those are not on chain, right? Those are like custodied vesting solutions, like from the investors themselves.
So so right, that's right. So unless it's less like a provider like Liquify or Toku or Magna has their own like smart contract that's running the kind of the vesting, or with Jupiter has like a claims portal now, unless it's being run or engineered by a smart contract on there. No, it's really just the provider, that's like saying like, okay, here every so often you have a certain amount of extra new tokens that are moved from the treasury allotment over to your address. But yeah, because you can't really lock tokens on chain today, except for now the advent of token extensions. There are some token extensions capabilities now added to tokens that you could control what addresses are allowed to hold the token, or you could have like a block list on the token itself. The minter could just go in and take the tokens out of an account. That's like a very new token program library that came out. It was sort of started in 2022. It came out like earlier last year. So like there's some new SPL based assets like PYUSD, and some other ones that have like these new token extensions added. So technically those you could have this sort of locking functionality, but not on the native L1 Sol asset. And again, like, yeah, that lock programmatically on chain is always within a stake address.
Cool. Well, looks like Jen had a question in there that you answered regarding locking always has to occur to be programmatically on chain locked. It needs to be through a stake account. Okay, cool. I just wanted to open up the floor. I think we got to all the questions that people had posed within the community. Did anyone else have any questions that either didn't get answers or that they have more or that came up during this conversation? Just give people a moment here to ask any more questions.
Yeah, hey guys, Gilbert here. So this one's, I guess, kind of directed at Zach. This has been great, so thank y'all. So we mentioned, the kind of the accumulation of staking rewards in our staked, our staked wallets. So I'm using a different tool. I got a lot of clients. I see that it was like last year, all of a sudden everybody just wants to use Solana. So I see all these deposits going to Solana, and then I lose it. So is there going to be a way for me to, track those rewards as they accrue in there before they withdraw them out, similar to like an account balance checker? Or do I need to take those addresses and import those addresses into my tracker, my subledger at the same time in order to see those?
Right. The answer is it depends. It depends on what subledger you're using. Unfortunately, yeah, I would say it's one thing where like you could easily just go into SolScan, check the withdrawal authority address, check the stake accounts. SolScan has been getting better at exposing like all the native staking information. So even today, like if you have your withdrawal authority address, plug that into SolScan, look at the stake accounts tab, it'll actually now show you the amount of rewards you've earned over time. Obviously, it won't that might not be super helpful because you won't be able to dollar and price that out by day. But you should be able to export some information from there. But yeah, it really depends on the subledger tool you're using. But yeah, and whenever we talk with subledgers, like the goal is like, you put in this one address, give me the rest of the activity and the rest of the stake addresses along with it. So some of these ones that I mentioned earlier can kind of do that today. Some other ones might be able to as well. I haven't seen personally, but yeah, it really depends on the subledger you're using and what functionality they have.
Yeah, thanks. I was afraid of that because it looks like I'm going to need to do some cleanup stuff and going back in there to find some of these balances. Because if they're not seeing it until they pull it out to the original address, then a lot of that could be lost. So I appreciate that. And then I have one other question. It was for Ben. So as an crypto accountant, I've got a lot of different clients. I'm always looking for new tools, right? And it's because of this AMA I found out about Noves, and you and Christian being here. So thanks for educating some of us that are not the technical side, but more in the operational piece. What are some things that Noves can do to kind of help me in my field and in a way that I could use it? Or is it something that's kind of not really meant for accountants, or are y'all working on that?
Yeah, so we started out with the intention of really being behind the scenes, so we wouldn't work directly with people like yourself. We would mostly just work with tools and help them get data cleaned up. What we found is that a lot of times there's this really strange thing where we hear from accountants or tax prep people that they aren't getting good enough data, but their actual provider insists that they're doing fine with the data. And so we kind of have this like little bit of a disconnect between the
Big
reality
disconnect.
and where they're kind of like in denial a little bit. And so we started building some capabilities to kind of go around and to be able to put those things in the hands of people like you. So there's a couple things. We do have a browser extension that Taylor mentioned. You can look in the Chrome store. And what that will do is when you're looking at a block explorer, it will show you a view. It'll just have like a little pop-up that you can turn on and off. It will show you a view of the data that is interpreted. So like it'll just tell you, hey, this was like a liquidity ad or whatever to kind of give you some context right away. And also show you a little more detail about the actual transfers that are kind of filtered down. So just as you're like going through stuff and spot checking things, that can be really useful to speed you along a bit.
Sounds helpful.
And then if you have chains that you can't get data you want, or if you're not getting a clean enough feed from whatever provider you have, I mentioned earlier, we do have a CSV export. It dumps the data in like an accounting in a financial format. So instead of like, if you're used to doing an export out of Etherscan or something like that, you got to do like 5 separate exports and they're in slightly different formats and it's very technical. And like our CSV is already formatted the way that an accounting system wants to import that data, or if you do stuff in Sheets or whatever. So that's kind of like an easy way for you to just get straight to a better source of data than
Awesome.
you could get otherwise. And I guess the third thing would be you can always pressure your subledger to give us a call and see if we can help wire some better data straight into the system, so you can kind of
I'll
bypass
definitely do
that.
that. I'm gonna keep that in mind.
But I would also, like we're super happy to like figure out how we can help people. So if you run into a situation, don't be afraid to just hit us up. And like on this staking stuff you were just talking about, we spent a lot of time building a system to deal with historical stake that's gone now and not active and all this kind of stuff, because people need it and they want to recognize that on a somebody we were working with wanted to recognize those rewards as soon as they accrued instead of waiting until they're withdrawn, right? So we built a system that
Yep.
basically we generate synthetic transactions that look like regular transactions that you can import along with the rest of your data so that your accounting system can just work with it in a normal way.
That'll
So
work.
feel free to hit us up. We're happy to see if there's a way we can get you data you need. And
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. That's
I think too, Ben and Christian, we should probably just connect again sometime soon in the near future. I know you're super busy with Denver stuff, but I know the middle of last year we were working on a way for the Crypto CFOs members to easily have access to Noves. I know we started building and then, we just kind of got busy on both sides. So maybe we should revisit that, reintroduce it to a lot of the new members in the community. And Gilbert, I can also follow up with some links. We've done many presentations with the guys over at Noves. I can give you the links to all that content. It'll probably help you streamline that learning process as well. But now more than ever, I think proper, easy to read data is extremely important. So that's why we're here. We want to make sure that this information is available to everybody in the community and in the industry. And we will continue to do our part. So yeah, I'll follow up with those links for you.
hey guys, I got to jump off. Appreciate having
we appreciate
me.
it.
Zach,
Thanks
it
so
was
much.
really nice talking to someone who is like very authoritatively knowledgeable about Solana stuff. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys so
Yeah,
much.
likewise. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, guys.
Perfect. All right, everybody, we will have the recording to this session available in a day or two. It'll be available in the community. As always, just let us know if there's any other topics, questions, comments. Feel free to post and ask your questions directly in the community. And if it's things that don't get answered or we need to dive deeper, we can always schedule them for one of our Wednesday calls. And we are planning our next CPE session very shortly. So once we figure out the topic on that, we will let everybody know. If you're not in the community yet, make sure you visit school.com/cryptocfos and you can just register and create your free account and network and connect with everybody in the space.
Also, if you have any topics for CPE or just general webinar requests, we're always open to hearing those. So if you're having a challenge with something specific, that's how this discussion came up. People were saying, hey, I'm having challenges with Solana's data. Let's get it together. So if I don't know the answers, I'll find someone that does. So we would love to host any kind of webinar that you guys are looking for. Also, Zach and I are doing an interview for the Niche to Necessity podcast soon. So I have a list of questions for him that I'm going to send over to him. But if you have any additional things you want me to ask him, shoot me a message or make a post in the community or whatever. Always happy to oblige people in that standpoint. So thanks again for everyone. Thank you so much for Zach and Ben for showing up here today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you and meeting you guys. So all right, thanks again.